Most languages spoken in Europe today are derived from three Indo-European branches: Romance, Slavic and Germanic. These were all consistent, more or less attested languages spoken around the time of the Roman Empire. The Germanic languages did not start to break up until the first centuries AD, and Latin not until after the collapse of the Roman imperial state. Slavic is still to this day a young Indo-European branch, with their diversification mostly taking place in the Middle Ages. The time depth of the linguistic diversity in Europe is thus not that deep, with most of the branching out stemming from the migration period and medieval era after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Greek and to lesser extent Celtic are some of the older Indo-European branches that show a long continuity and that we can track long back into time thanks to early attestation. The situation around the Mediterranean before the Roman expansion and spread of Latin was much more diverse. The Balkans were a patchwork of various tribes and languages, like the Thracians, Illyrians and Dacians. Most of them, apart from the Albanians, whose relation to these ancient groups is not fully clear, are completely extinct, replaced by Slavic and Latin, and lost to history, apart from some place names and old loanwords. Moving west, the Italian peninsula was likewise a patchwork of various Italic languages related to Latin, along with pre-Indo-European languages like Etruscan, Rhetic. In the south, Greek was spoken, and in the north, Celtic. Most of this ethno-linguistic landscape was likewise subsumed under expansion of Latin through the Roman rule. The situation in Iberia was just as complicated. Non-Indo-European groups like Iberians and Basques were still widespread in this area, with Celtic-speaking groups with unclear affiliation to other Indo-European groups expanding. Today, only the Basques remain with this lost diversity, a place where several different unrelated language families were spoken alongside each other in antiquity. The overall picture we can gain from this is that the linguistic landscape of southern Europe was highly varied and changing, with very little of this manifold of ethnic and linguistic groups surviving to this day. Going north, the sources become sparser, but most sources by classical authors claim that Celtic languages, such as Gaulish, was the most widely spoken language in what is now Western and Central Europe, with some theories suggesting that the ancient Belgians may have had a more distinct speech. Continental Celtic was almost wholly replaced by Latin and Germanic in the later centuries, with highly evolved and derived Celtic languages only surviving into the present on the British Isles in modern times. When we go further beyond the frontiers of the Roman Empire, maps often show huge swaths of Europe as Proto-Germanic or Proto-Balto-Slavic. This does not, however, hold up to scrutiny. Both Germanic and Slavic were idiosyncratic Indo-European languages that show a distinct development and a late breakup into dialects. This contrasts with the generally believed theory on the spread of Indo-European languages into Europe around the late Neolithic, which creates a huge gap of thousands of years between the arrival of Indo-European and diversification of dialects from Slavic and Germanic, which happened around the late Roman period at the earliest. We also know that large parts of Eastern Europe that now are Slavic-speaking were once home to nomadic horsemen like the Scythians, who spoke a language more related to Iranian. The truth was more likely that there were many groups in ancient Northern Europe, both Indo-European and non-Indo-European, that were absorbed as late as the Roman period in the Iron Age, with maybe only a few traces left, such as words for place names and loan words with difficult etymologies. Some languages of Northern Europe, like the highly conservative Baltic languages, were not even attested until the High or Late Middle Ages, which show us just how big our knowledge gap is. If you take Germanic as an example, it is difficult, if not downright impossible, for it to have been spoken in a stable and homogeneous form, from Jutland to Trondheim, only for dialects to first emerge from around 500 AD onwards. No traces of earlier diversity or older sound laws are recoverable from any Scandinavian language and dialect. The vast dialectal diversity in Scandinavia is a recent phenomenon. Likewise, there are similar phenomena on the British Isles. Old Irish, as attested in the earliest sources, is a language that came from a period of immense language change, yet it shows very little dialectal variation. Some linguists point to some elements of the language that show substrate influence as late as the centuries AD. The Sami and to a lesser extent Finnic languages are also believed to have expanded into their present areas much later than most would think, with Sami not reaching central Scandinavia until the latter part of the Iron Age, absorbing large amounts of loanwords from ancient native hunter groups in the process. We simply have to accept that the prehistory of Northern Europe before the medieval period is poorly known to us, but it's reasonable to assume that it was just as diverse and changing as that of the ancient Mediterranean.